Hey guys, this is Jacob at Proper Parts Co. This is our 1999 BMW 323i LS swap project. We've got a 6-liter LQ iron block in here from a truck motor. It's got a 335i rear-wheel drive transmission, a whole bunch of swap kits and adapter kits. And we've been waiting a long time for some parts. A lot of the swap is already done. I've already got the motor in, I've already got the transmission and a lot of other stuff bolted up, but we've been waiting for a wiring harness. Finally, I have the wiring harness here. So today we're going to drop the motor out, install the harness, add a couple heat shields, and hopefully get it started soon. So the last thing I was doing here was dealing with some of the heater system. We're going to have full AC and heater core hooked up. The car wants to be driven in the winter. So to get the motor out, we've got to start taking some of this out. Nothing's bolted in yet. It's also just kind of sitting in there for mock-up. But we're going to have to take out all these AC lines, and then all the heater core lines that are down here. There are a couple of mounts that we're going to have to change once the motor is out. The mount here for the OEM HVAC valve, this guy right here, it's kind of in the way of the air conditioning line, so we're going to have to move this bracket over. So this is something that we can do when the motor's out. It's a lot easier to play around and cut and weld in the engine bay. We have a lower coolant hose that's on. That's going to have to come out. Now, way down here, we have our relocated oil filter housing. We have a whole bunch of AN lines going to it, and unfortunately, this is the best spot that I could find for this housing at the moment. It kind of interferes with the alternator, so if the engine does have to come out through the bottom, then we've got to take this off. So we're going to unscrew all of these partially made loose AN lines, and then we'll get the oil filter housing disconnected. We had the power steering system mocked up just to get all the lines right. We're using all the stock BMW quick neck fittings, so we've got this little tool here to take them off safely without breaking them. So we've got to disconnect the return line back to the tank from the cooler, and then we're also going to have to disconnect the feed line from the rack back to the cooler. On this side, we've got the last power steering line that has to come off. This is the return from the rack to the cooler. Then on the other side, we have these silver AN lines. This is the lines that we're going from the engine to the oil filter housing and then over to the oil cooler in the front. So we're going to leave this little one, it's not in the way, but this big one going from the engine to the cooler is in the way. So we're going to disconnect it here. And then way over here, this is where we have one of our first problems at the swap. The oil lines that go to the remote oil filter housing are very, very close to the headers here. This oil pan used to have a very large nub sticked off on the side, and it held probably a good extra half liter or liter of oil, but it forced us to have to either put these oil lines right beside the header, which I mean they still kind of are, or they would have had to go under the subframe, which was not going to work. So we had to cut that off, weld a little plate onto the oil pan, make it a little bit smaller, and now we've got a much better route for our oil lines. And hopefully them being stainless and then having a little bit of heat shielding on top, as well as heat shielding the headers, will be enough to keep them protected from the heat, but we'll find out once we start driving it. Next, we've got the exhaust Y pipe. This is what connects the two headers, goes into the rest of the exhaust because we're using a single 3-inch exhaust all the way back. Now, this came from CX Racing, but it's not going to work for us because this was meant for a T56 transmission, so it hits everything on the BMW transmission. But it was fairly easy to modify it. We've only got it tacked up right now, so I don't want to have the whole weight of the engine and the transmission sitting on it. So we're going to take it out and keep it out of the way. For the suspension, this car right now has an SLR angle kit on it. This is the medium-sized one. It's not the Ultra. I'm not going to end up using this for the project. This is just sort of a placeholder to keep the car rolling while it's not on the hoist. We do have an SLR mini kit, which uses stock control arms and little adapters on the knuckle. So we're going to take this off just so we can get it out of the way and take the motor out. Also, going to have to take that wheel off. Coilovers, we've got Feal one-way true coilovers. The gears are converted from divorced spring and shock. The dry shaft heat shield, this exhaust hanger has to come off. We had all this installed to fabricate the exhaust, but it's in the way of the transmission to take the transmission off. So we're going to unbolt this stuff here. That's supposed to be a 10 mil.
Hey guys, we had a bit of an audio problem here. The microphone got disconnected in this clip and a couple of other clips, so there isn't a very clear explanation of what's going on, so I'm going to do a voiceover here. We've got the cart underneath the engine, lining it up, making sure that it's going to touch the subframe and the transmission, and then we've got a little bit of lumber underneath the cart. What we're trying to do is make sure that when we lay the drivetrain down onto the cart, it's contacting the cart level, so it's not going to drop the transmission when we unbolt it or drop the engine down a little bit when we unbolt it. We've got 4 18 mil bolts holding in the subframe, it's 2 on each side. Then we've got 4 13 mil bolts holding in the transmission, 2 on each side, same thing. The control arms are a little bit in the way, but everything else is pretty easy to kind of hold out of the way. Everything drops right out of the bottom. There's nothing that needs to be really disconnected. All the accessories and everything attached to the motor can stay on it, so it's super easy to just drop everything on the bottom if you have to service anything or if there's any big maintenance, motor blows up, whatever it might be. Unfortunately, with the adapter plate for the transmission, you have to take everything out to be able to get at the clutch because there's a very large plate bolted to the transmission and it just does not fit between the back of the block and the transmission tunnel. But here we've got our motor pretty much out, just got to lift the car off of it, and we're going to go talk about the wiring harness and throw that on the motor.
This is our Wiring Specialties wiring harness. This is supposed to be full plug and play. It's got a whole bunch of different modules and boxes that come with it to talk to the OEM CAN system in the E46. Hopefully it works. Assuming it will. I've heard good things about these harnesses. I've never used one personally, but looks pretty good to me. So we're gonna figure out how the hell to plug everything in to this engine. Something like that. Hopefully. We've got the harness on. A couple issues, interesting things. At the back here, I have 2 plugs. Well, I've got 1 plug here for a temp gauge, and I have 1 plug here for a temp gauge. Not sure what the back one's for, so we're going to have to call them and figure out why that's there, or if I'm missing something. Over here, we've got the intake air temp sensor. This is on the wrong side. I requested to have it on the passenger side of the motor, so I'll have to call them and ask about that. Over here, we've got our map sensor plug. It's all the way back here. My map sensor's over here. Even if I pull this harness all the way forward, it's nowhere near fitting. So, not sure what that's about. And then we've got our oil pressure gauge switch. So this is the OEM LS1. It's got a big thread on it. This is the BMW one that we're using. So I've got to get an adapter to adapt these two. That won't be very difficult. Aside from that, everything else fits pretty good. No real complaints. So Wiring Specialties has a great customer support line. You can call them and ask them how to install your harness, basically. So we're going to give them a call and see what the deal is with the extra sensor plug over here and what can be done about these wires that aren't long enough or in the wrong spot. So after done with that, well, actually, we're going to put the motor in anyway, just to mock it up, because it'll still run like this, whether those are plugged in or not. This is our starter side. We've got the headers off right now, and we've got a couple things going on here. I've added a little bit of heat shielding to all of the power wires for the starter. The Wiring Specialties little cover doesn't really do anything, because you have to have 3 wires on here, one for the starter, one for the power supply from the car. We have the one that goes to the starter from the Wiring Specialties harness, and then we have the one over here that jumps over to the alternator on the other side of the engine. So this alternator cable down here, Wiring Specialties wants you to plug this into the alternator. It runs under the engine. You have to put P-clamps on the oil pan bolts to hold it up. So we're going to do that once it's back in the air, since it's a lot easier. For the engine, I've been worried about heat. I don't know how much of a problem it's going to be, but I do know that there's a lot of guys who have drift cars with these things in them, and they seem to cook starters after a little while, just because the headers are millimeters away from the starter. So I have this little heat shield. I still got to cut out a little bit of a nice contour. It's going to get hose clamped right here onto the starter, so that's going to help protect it from the heat. I have to get a little bit of fiberglass packing material to put inside. And then the other thing that we're going to do is I've drilled a small hole into the engine mount here, and we're going to have a small, maybe 2-inch in diameter brake duct hose, and it's going to come in from the wheel well in through here and just get held on to the engine mount, so that it's feeding some cool air from the road onto the starter, just in case it turns into a problem. With the motor out, I've got to peel back some of this heat shielding that we added. This car was originally an automatic car, so we've had to add all the clutch lines and pop some holes through the chassis for the clutch line to come through. Now, I haven't drilled a hole in my heat shielding yet for the clutch line, so I've got to get that sorted out. And while I'm in here, I also need to get this fuel line out so I can cut it. I have it marked here. When the engine was in with the frame on, we measured out how long it has to be. But it's also held in behind all these heat shields. There's some P-clamps here and a couple other things. Now, this right here is our stock clutch line. This is what comes out of the E46. It's not quite in the right position, so I'm going to run inside and fix that. This is back in a stock position. We've got our heat shield goes on like this, and we're just going to mark out approximately where it goes. This stuff back here is never really going to be seen again, hopefully. So it's not required to be super accurate, but I still do want it to be at least half decent. So right about here is where it's going to come out. So we're just going to drill that out with a step drill. We'll deburr the other side after, once we know it's the right size and shape. All right, I'm going to drill it a little bit bigger so that if we have to take this out, I can pull that clip. But aside from that, that's going to fit pretty good, and we're going to have some heat wrap on top of the clutch line anyway, so I'm not too worried about this being sticking out like that, and even though it's plastic. So a little bit of drilling on this side. All right. Hole's the right shape, easy to get to. And then you can pull the clip out if we ever have to take it in and out. And that can go back in. So we're going to go cut up this fuel line. I'm going to put our AN fitting on the other side. And then we can do final install for this, because this should never have to come out again, hopefully. We've got our finished fuel line here. We're going to install this again. It screws in down here to the fuel filter. This is a filter and a regulator. It's out of a C5 Corvette, I think, or C6 maybe. It's all built in one, so it's pretty easy to fit. We've got to put a little bit of Loctite on here, since we're not going to be taking any of this out again, hopefully. It's unlikely that this would vibrate out, but certainly doesn't hurt. So we'll put this in here. And I'm just going to leave it snug until I have everything else fitted up the way I want it. We've got our second P-clamp down here, and I have a little plastic nut for that. That's it. Now, this fuel line is fitting here, and that's pretty well where it goes. So we'll tighten this top one. Doesn't have to be very tight with Loctite. And now that that's done, we can put all the rest of these heat shields back, since we won't be needing to move any of this anymore. Okay, all this heat shielding is back in. Our fuel line pops out the top. This stuff is mostly here to cover the fuel line and all the brake lines, since our ABS and brake booster and master cylinder and everything is up here. All the lines run down here and then right behind. A couple go to the back, one of them goes to the other side, and the other one goes to the front here. So the stock E46s, they have 6 cylinders in them. The exhaust is all on the opposite side of the engine bay. So all of this was added just to protect, hopefully, from the extra header. So now that that's all finished, we are going to move over to the other side, and we have to look at the heater box control over here, because we got to move that bracket. This is the mount that holds the little valve here for the heater core, lets the water in and out of the heater core, and there's a small electric pump in there to keep it flowing. Now, we welded it in here originally, and we did not mock up the AC lines before we welded this in. And once the AC lines are in, it just hits the top of this, and it won't allow it to sit properly, so it wants to sit more like this. What we're going to do is cut off this bottom and this top bracket on this side. Hopefully it'll be able to bend in a little bit more. And I'm not going to weld it yet, but I just want to cut that while the engine's out, so that I can move it around when the engine's back in and make sure everything's going to fit. I can only move it so much because of the expansion tank here. The hose that comes off and goes to the lower radiator hose is right here. So I have to be fairly careful with where I put this, but it does kind of have to go around here somewhere. So I'll cut it off. Hopefully I can just push it in and it'll fix it. If not, I might have to relocate it somewhere else and make these heater core lines again. So we've got it disconnected there enough. When we put the motor back in, hopefully we'll just be able to push this in, and that'll solve the problem. But it's hard to say from here. We're going to have to see it with the motor in. So just for reference, this guy goes in here like that. Hopefully this will be enough. We'll find out. Engine is back in. Wiring's on it. We can start hooking up some stuff. And we'll be doing a whole bunch of random little things to kind of get ready for the first startup. Now that the harness is in, I can figure out where the O2 sensors are going to go in the Y pipe. I can finalize all of the cooling system over here and everything that was conflicting with the AC system. That's all going to get dealt with. I can hook up all the vacuum system. We've got valve cover hookups here, one on the back. There's a hookup for the brake booster over there with the check valve. We'll have to figure out this feeder line for the coolant. Not 100% sure where that's going to go yet. Probably tee into the upper line to the top of the tank so it bleeds itself automatically. The wiring, I've got to sort out where everything is going to go, how it's all going to get routed, how it's going to go through the shields, and I've also got to go order myself a cable for the throttle and get that fit up and see where I can go with that. Now, over here, it is fairly tight. I would like to look back there to make sure the harness isn't getting crushed, but it's kind of difficult to see anything right now, so that might be disassemble a couple things and figure out what's going on if we have to. And this harness is quite long. Not really sure where I'm going to end up putting it. I do want it to go over there, but it's a lot of stuff to fit through the firewall. It's definitely not going to go that way, so we might end up having to take this off if this has to go behind the firewall, but hopefully I can fit the ECU and most items in there. But this is quite a bit of wiring to get jammed into there, and I mean, there's only so many places that I can put it. It does fit nicely over here where the OEM harness goes, but it's quite a bit longer than the OEM, so we'll see how that is. Also, my OBD2 connector is only so long. It seems like this is something that was meant to go inside the car, so maybe we'll have to reorganize that. We'll see. We're going to take a quick look at this again. Talked about this in the beginning of the video, the whole issue with the air conditioning line and the coolant lines for the heater core. I'm going to reinstall all of these air conditioning lines and then see if I still have the same fitment problems as before. So it does fit a little bit better with that up against, but it's still really pushing on here. And if I take this small hose now, I'm going to guess it's difficult to get in. Oh, no, it actually does fit pretty well. So that's not terrible. That's manageable, but everything is kind of touching. And I'd really not like to have everything touching and pushing on itself. One option we do have without changing too much is I could remove that bracket and lift it up a little bit. I would have to make a new lower coolant hose, one that goes back to the pump or from the pump. And, you know, I could put it up here kind of, and that would pretty much get rid of the issue with the air conditioning lines. But I think that's then going to run into an issue with the heater box, or sorry, with the coolant tank. So we'll throw this in here and see how it is. Okay, with this installed, this is where we've got some more problems. So this hose goes down to the lower radiator hose, not plumbed yet, that's okay. All of the AC hoses fit fine. Now, this is in any other position aside from the position that's already in. It's going to be a bit of a job because now it doesn't really fit around this bend. So let's try to put it back down there at the bottom where it was kind of touching everything, and I'll see if I can make that work or not. I've got a very small clearance between this radiator hose coming out of here and then the little heater valve. I can maybe fit my pinky in there, maybe, but that's not terrible. I don't particularly like that this AC line is rubbing up against this the entire time. Now, to be fair, this is a heat insulation on top of the AC line, so it's not fully unprotected. It's certainly better than nothing. So I think I can live with that, and I think this is going to be acceptable enough for this car, at least to start. If there's any issues in the future with rubbing or hitting or anything like that, then we can solve that as they come. So let's just get this situated here in the firewall. That's hooked up where it would belong. That's our power wire. So it will end up sitting here and kind of riding and pushing on this. I can live with it for now. We'll see how it goes. I think I am going to add a little bit more wrap here in this area just for the headers, just to try to block off some of the heat, especially if I'm getting this coolant hose and the air conditioning lines. I'm expecting quite a bit more heat than a standard BMW over here, and the BMWs have a large cover that covers this line completely, and there's no coolant lines over here. So I'm not sure how the heat is going to go, but we're going to find out. I know many people who run this without any covers at all, and it does work. I'm just more worried about the longevity and reliability of the car, so hopefully that won't turn into a problem for us. All right, this is our very interesting lower radiator hose. It works, it fits, it's probably not going to leak. It's very much not pretty, but I can live with it for now. This is temporary. I'll find something that looks better and looks a little bit nicer and fits the car later on. But for now, we've got to connect this hose down to this hose. This is how the cooling system will be filled up, how the expansion tank will be fed, and then all of our return air goes back up into the top so that this automatically bleeds from all the steam ports on the top of the head, and then also the upper rad hose on the other side, just like a stock E46. So this guy, we're just going to slap it in here loosely. This wiring harness here is in the way. So that's going to sit right around there like that. And then this hose is just going to connect into here. So I've got my measurement. I'm going to go grab a marker. We're going to cut this off, and I'm probably going to cut this right around here. And then we'll make sure that that all fits. This line, I think this line is from a newer BMW 440, probably something for the engine. Don't quite remember, but we've got a huge box of coolant hoses here that we use for stuff like this. Very convenient. It's not a perfect line, but it is much nicer than having the universal bent stuff. That kind of looks a little bit weird in an engine swap, and normally everything's a different color. At least this is black. It looks relatively OEM, and you're not going to see anything down there once there's covers and everything. So for now, all I'm going to do is make sure this is in the right spot. Take this down here, grab the pencil, mark it over here. So my silver Sharpie is hiding, but we're going to use a black one instead. Still be able to see it. So with that up, doesn't make much of a difference. But when I have this down here, I want to cut it right around there. So right around here is where we want to cut that off. So we'll pop this hose off, and then we'll go cut it. I'm just going to cut it temporarily a little bit wide with some snips, and then we'll make a nice cut with a razor blade later. So here's the snips. Cut into here. I'm just trying to ride the edge of this old fitting since it's garbage anyway. And our cut's slightly outside of the line that we marked, so that should fit pretty good. Okay, now we've got a nice and ugly shitty cut here, but we'll clean this up with a razor to make it look nice once we know that it fits well. This has to get splined on, only fits on one way. And this guy's going to come down and plug into here. Now, where I have it cut, it slid onto this barb really, really easily, because if you look at stock BMW fittings, when they go over top of the barb, the hose gets a little bit bigger. So over here, the hose is whatever diameter this is, probably 3/4. Then when it goes up on top of the barb, it gains an eighth, 3/8, quarter, something on top, because it has to go over top of the barb. So if you cut it here, you end up with a larger OD than when you want, when we actually want the OD of something over here or maybe right after the bend. So we're going to cut it a little bit more. I'll grab the razor, do it with a nice new razor instead this time so that we can cut it fresh. And I mean, if I put my finger in there, I can feel where the step up is. It feels like the step is kind of over here, which is maybe slightly short, but we might still be able to cut that. I mean, if I go down here, I could honestly probably cut another 3/8 of an inch off of this. So, you know, well beyond our mark, and it'll still work. So I'm going to try that just so we can get down to the correct OD so that this stays on and doesn't leak. We could definitely put it on there. We could put a hose clamp. It probably wouldn't leak right now, but that's just a good way of making a leak for the future, and it's certainly not going to hold up forever. Okay, so I've got a brand new blade in the Finger Cutter 9000. These things are really sharp when they're new, really good at cutting stuff. Gloves probably won't help me, so we're going to try not to cut my fingers off. Got a little piece of wood so that I don't chop into the engine bay by accident, and we're going to try to make a nice square cut. Professional tip is to keep your fingers as close as possible to the blade, so if you do mess up, tend to mess your fingers up as well. And then next time you probably won't mess up. You'll think a little bit more before making the cut, but that's just the way I think about it. So that much looks like a way better cut than last time. Don't have any burrs sticking out. Looks a lot nicer. And when I put this on, that fits pretty much perfectly. It doesn't just slide over. You have to push it a little bit and stretch the material out. So I'm pretty happy with that. Just get it all the way seated there. And everything still lines up. So when this is bolted in, everything will still fit fine. And we're good there. So left to do over here, we've got to trim this bracket up. It doesn't do anything. This used to be here for the secondary air pump for an OEM E46 M3. We're going to get rid of that so it looks a little better. I have to find someone who can cut and weld, braze, whatever, this line. I need basically 2 more inches here. Haven't done a lot of research on this. I've heard some people braze, some people are able to TIG weld it, but I don't really know. So I'm going to do some looking around to find that. Get this connected up. I've got to go buy a whole bunch of hose clamps so that I can hose clamp everything here so nothing leaks. A whole bunch of BMW clips so we can clip these in. And then we've got to look at the upper rad hose, which is over there. That's going to connect our breather to the expansion tank, upper rad hose to the engine, to the radiator, and then also our steam port. So I'll probably need a little T for that. Okay, so that's going to be the end of the first video here on this LS car. Definitely going to be a lot more work, hopefully quite a few more videos. Next time, we're probably going to look at the O2 sensors. I have to find a new place for those, weld all that in, weld up the exhaust. I'm going to have to figure out this upper rad hose, finish up the cooling system. A little bit of modifications in the engine bay, just cleaning up stuff, all of the wiring, figuring out where the ECU is going to go. Probably going to have to figure out the pedal box and the clutch line and finish up the oiling system. Once all that's done, should be able to start it. It's pretty close. Already has a base tune on it, so there's no reason it won't start like this, even if it's not fully hooked up with coolant and power steering and all that kind of stuff. But I would like to see this running because it's been here for quite a long time, and I'd like to see a little bit of big progress on it at least. So hopefully you guys stay for longer. We'll be around making as many videos as we can on this.